welcome to this ET Now special. I'm Nantara Rai. A day after ET Now broke the news about differences between the IndiGo promoter founders Rahul Bhatia and Rakesh Gangwal, the IndiGo stock took the worst beating in over 7 months. It closed more than 10% in the red, and that too led by high volumes. The management stepped in today to try and assuage fears. In a letter to employees, CEO Ronojoy Dutta did not deny the mega ET Now exclusive of the rift between the two promoters, but went on to say the company's growth strategy remains in place and they're working hard to achieve it. The management has been charged by the board. What's interesting, of course, is that the entire tussle between the two promoters is believed to be about power, executive power, which the Rahul Bhatia camp believes it's losing. This is not the first time the promoter feud has taken a toll on the share price, impacted minority shareholders, impacted the operations of a company and led to wealth destruction. To discuss this further, I'm joined by Jitendra Bhargav, the former executive director at Air India, Prabal Basu Roy, the management advisor and former corporate director, Sandeep Parekh, the founder of FinSec Law Advisors. I'm also going to be joined by Mohit Saraf from LNL very shortly. We're going to talk about IndiGo. We're going to talk about wealth destruction that we saw today. We're also going to make it a larger topic, gentlemen, about why it is that we keep seeing this so very often at India Inc. So Jitendra Bhargav, I'll come to you first with the aviation perspective. Today, clearly, you saw the investors press the sell button, press the panic button. It's very evident right from the opening bell. And if you were to go on social media, it's been a massive impact to this ET Now news break where people are talking about, after Jet Airways, is IndiGo in trouble? Where's this going to leave consumers? What's it going to mean for the aviation sector? Of course, while the promoters' harmony is important for IndiGo to function so smoothly, would you say today's reaction, the fears today even by consumers, are a bit exaggerated?
Let's look at it this way. IndiGo has been India's most successful, profitable airline. They came in after Captain Gopinath said they had that experiment with low-cost carrier. They had the right business model and therefore they succeeded where other airlines were failing. Naresh Goyal, Jet Airways, Air India for that matter, they were not succeeding because they didn't have the right model, but they cracked it. IndiGo did not expand beyond the Indian shores for a long time. Even after 12 years of existence, they still don't cover Europe, United States, or they don't even have plans for a wide-bodied aircraft. Having said this, both the promoters had combined very well to give India a very good airline. Now, what has suddenly happened is really not in public domain. It's still being conjectured that whether it was with respect to the senior appointments that took place in the last 12 months, particularly after Aditya Ghosh's exit, or I would even go a step earlier. If you recall, when Air India's disinvestment was announced, IndiGo was the carrier which informed the ministry that they would be keen. But the day it was formally, the process was set in motion, they said, we are not keen. Now, I see something of a difference of opinion there existing, somebody wanting to expand and the other partner perhaps not wanting it. Otherwise, why would a professionally managed company take such a U-turn on investment and expansion project? Because IndiGo, after almost getting 45% of India's domestic market share, we still wouldn't count IndiGo amongst the mega global carriers. So if somebody is pursuing it, and I would presume that Rakesh Gangwal, having been in global airlines worldwide, he would be keen on getting IndiGo there. And I wouldn't know why it is happening. Now, what are the consequences? We must look at it. We have a very small number of airlines with very little capacity left for anyone to absorb. Now, should IndiGo's ambitious growth program slacken, now it will have very severe consequences of the Indian aviation market. Now, that is where the worrying point is. IndiGo as a carrier, all right, they can slacken or they can do it. But the impact on the Indian aviation will be phenomenal because Jet Airways collapse meant that SpiceJet took 30, 40 aircraft of it. They've expanded. Now, they would have been reaching a saturation point for some time. So, I only hope that the rift between the two promoters is not allowed to drift any further. They patch up, they work, look at the total interest, because it is in the interest of both the promoters to ensure that IndiGo continues to expand. Now, I don't foresee kind of a thing that there will be some kind of issues that cannot be resolved when you discuss it. After all, each one knows where have the global carriers gone in the past. There are case studies available. If airlines which have done so well, how do you expand further? And I'm sure both of them are mature enough, and it will be in their interest, Indian aviation interest.
I take your point.
Nayantara, just one point. You know, the tragedy of Indian aviation is that we don't have a towering figure who could get two warring sides together and say, look, this is the way forward. The only thing would be either the courts or the NCLT, etc. But out of court, somebody, if there was a towering figure whom both of them respected and they could heed his advice, I think that is what we are missing.
But, okay, I'll take that point to Sandeep Parekh now. Sandeep Parekh, why does it have to be that this towering figure to try and mediate and iron out differences have to be from the aviation sector? The point I'm trying to get at is, for example, when you saw the Ambani brothers fight, you saw figures like KV Kamath, for example, coming into play. When the Munjal brothers had their split very recently, it is believed that someone like Sunil Bharti Mittal intervened. So, to counter that point that Jitendra Bhargav said, why does it have to be someone from the aviation sector? But A, that, and second, what I want to ask you, Sandeep Parekh, is that, do promoters realize that, of course, they are emotionally attached to their companies, but the minute they have LLCs, LLPs, they start listing, they get other shareholders, it's not just about them anymore. It's not just about everyone else be damned and my way is the only way or the highway.
Hi, Nayantara. First of all, congratulations on breaking this story. It's all in the media now. I think, when you have such substantial shareholding in a public company, in a listed company, 75% stake is the maximum permissible stage really for most companies. So they have an overwhelming right in terms of governing, managing, pretty much the entire board of directors would be kind of looking up to them. So any kind of disruption between the two of them would have a huge impact on the governance of the company, and certainly it's a cause of great concern for the minority shareholders. On mediation, I think again I don't know how deep the problem is and how long it's been festering, because many of these issues typically fester for months and years before they kind of enter the public domain. So maybe things are so bad that mediation has not worked, or maybe things are now ripe for mediation to take place. So hopefully, both sides will see some sense and realize it's no longer their company, and there are many other interests at play, including the company itself, including the shareholders, including basically the fate of corporate governance itself. So I think they should certainly, they've created such a valuable company, they should not fritter it away. And in all these things, hygiene is very important. It's not it's a key to success. It doesn't mean that if you have the hygiene right, you will succeed. But if you don't have the hygiene right in terms of corporate governance, in terms of the basics, you can never succeed. So they should take that into heed before kind of getting into a public spat.
Right. Okay. You didn't answer the question which I asked you about, why does someone from the same sector have to try and be the mediator? Mr. Roy, if I could come to you now, look at the previous instances that we had. I just talked about the two Ambani brothers. We had seen the kind of impact it had had on wealth creation, wealth destruction. But then, in the end, you also saw other companies being listed. For example, Reliance Communications, you had the RNRL. Of course, you see a lot of mergers, demergers, companies going broke after that. That's one instance. The Hero family mergers, that's another instance. When you're talking about promoters spat, very recently, of course, the one that comes immediately to mind, Cyrus Mistry and Ratan Tata, look at the impact that had on the share price, on all of the shareholders. So many such cases that you have. It's always a retail shareholder which is holding the short end of the stick. Of course, there's no way for the retail shareholder to ring fence himself or herself. But at times like this, why is it that promoters act, if I may say so, with so much entitlement?
Well, that's a matter of psychology, Nayantara, from not only from India, but from this part of the world, actually. I've seen cases in Indonesia, Vietnam, South Korea, etc. It's all that control mindset, even though it's publicly listed. So that's going into the realm of corporate governance, really, which is very different in the West versus what we have here. But I agree with you, of all types of corporate disputes on the board or otherwise, I think if promoter disputes take precedence, it is potentially very damaging. And primarily because in this particular case, or in other cases as well, if each promoter has more than 26% shareholding, they can potentially block resolutions. So, the entire direction of the company gets very confused, especially on the strategic side and on the management side. The CEO, for example, who does he take instructions from? So those sort of issues come into play, and uncertainty is not something which institutional investors like. And that is why they dump the stock, and therefore the minority shareholder gets hit. That is the cycle. Now, being a minority shareholder, I don't think there's any protection under the law or otherwise. And it's up to the good sense of the promoters to make sure that you add value. And obviously we have cases of that too, like HDFC Bank or HDFC, etc., which have consistently created value, but then there was only one promoter. So, this is a difficult one, but it's to do with the culture of our culture and culture from this part of the world, the eastern part of the world.
Okay, so you're saying it's a cultural problem. Sandeep Parekh, would you say that it's just a cultural problem? Having said that, how can we actually try and address this entire issue? I've just listed out a few of the cases. There's so many more that you're seeing them in court. For example, we read recently about the Kirloskar brothers, for example. I could go on and on. So that's a valid point that Mr. Basu has also raised, that while it might be cultural, there's also corporate governance issues at hand. Promoters complain that there is too much of a check on them, they need a free hand. But when they do have a free hand, look what they do. This question has to be asked.
Yeah, though having said that, you can't stop a fight between two people, especially with such a massive stake. I mean, ideally, of course, in an ideal world, in corporate governance utopia, nobody should fight. But I think both of them should see kind of the winning combination they've had till now, and not kind of damage the prospects of the airline, because as I said, it's not a proprietorship, it's not a partnership. There are public shareholders involved, and there's a huge damage it could do to the general market for public companies and faith of the people in promoters navigating these. And the aviation sector, as you know, is going through pretty turbulent times. It's been good times for them, but generally it's been a tough time for the sector. So I hope they see the opportunity and not kind of retreat away, as I said. And as I said also that this is kind of the minimum hygiene is required before success happens. Once corporate governance goes away, public fights start, you will see a huge hit in performance as well.
Okay. Mohit Saraf now joining us from NLL Partners. Hi Mohit, good evening. Thanks so much for joining us. We were going beyond the fight at IndiGo and talking about promoter tussles and what it does to retail investors, to the commitments that they make to shareholders, the commitments that they make to banks, to their own employees, the milestones that they have set out, which suddenly disappear because of these promoter issues. And we've seen many, many examples of that. You're the lawyer that we've got on the panel. Tell me something. Can anything be done on this in law? Can, like, for example, the Companies Act or other acts be strengthened at all, which could at least provide some kind of a ring fencing for the small shareholders?
Actually, if you look at the Companies Act, there are provisions regarding protection for minority shareholders. There are protection for oppression and mismanagement. The protections are there. But I think right now, if you have two sectors or two promoter group fighting, very little can you do, because in shareholder agreement you have these issues. But again, I think the governance issues, I think unless the Indian promoters start getting professional managers and they are running the company, I think that will be the case. But if you look at IndiGo right now, I think largely this is run by professional managers. There are two promoters, and they may, I don't know whether they are really fighting, to what extent they are fighting, but whatever, if they are fighting, then that does create some lot of disruption, but it's really run by professional managers. So to some extent, there is a way to mitigate that impact. There are rights under Companies Act, there are rights under the listing agreements. A lot of these rights are there, which protects minority. But again, to create a bad market news that promoters are fighting and the share prices will correct, I think that is a risk which I think when you are dealing with Indian equity and you are dealing with Indian personalities, Indian promoter personalities, I think probably you are running that risk. And often I would say, because this company is run by professional managers, I expect that at some stage people will talk to each other and try to find a solution. It may result in exit of one partner, or they may agree to a governance structure which is in the interest of the company, maybe not interest of the promoter. I think whatever most cases I see is when promoters are fighting is there is basically it's a fight to take control. You mentioned about Tata's and Cyrus Mistry. Cyrus Mistry was never a promoter of the company, but he was a shareholder and he tried to take control. So I would say it's largely because right now the two promoter group are virtually equal shareholding, 37-38%. And therefore, this is basically both are trying to take control, and they're trying to possibly, they are trying to see who the professional managers report to, and maybe one promoter is getting a little bit more in control than the other, and there is a backlash for that. But again, these are very disruptive, but you can understand these are possible. But again, I don't think that it will affect the company so badly or business so badly. It can create disruption in a short run, but overall I think it probably will be good, because it will either lead to participation together or it will lead to an exit, and both ways it's good thing. So I would say right now both, I think this fight is probably good for the company, short run problems, long term benefit, either it will be an exit or they will find a common platform to work together. Both are good for the shareholders. And I see, if you see, I have always seen before the fight really erupts, maybe there are the problems for last 2-3 years, and therefore maybe things have not gone the right way, and now it's erupted. So I would say if they get settled, it will be good for both company, the two group of promoters, and for retail investors. And I don't have doubts that it won't get settled.
Okay, I take that point. But Mr. Basu, I've got to ask this question as well. Very often when we see this kind of spats, it always goes down to that shareholder agreement. And you always find these shareholder agreements, therefore being loosely worded or not as worded well as they should have been, or being very vague. And then I'm not going to say what are people like Mohit Saraf doing, but yeah, what were they doing when they were framing those shareholder agreements, and why aren't these agreements also maybe updated on a regular basis?
Well, Nantara, you see, I have been involved in 3 shareholder agreements of this nature while they were getting negotiated and then made. And there are many issues which go into when two people come together. So, even though there are watertight agreements are possible, but effectively, because of the anxiousness to get a deal done between two set of shareholders, certain things are left vague and left on trust. And governance structure, by and large, would be defined. But in this particular case, for example, let's take IndiGo as an example. I have no idea what the reason is. But let's say, IndiGo is at an inflection point. And the main reason for shareholder or promoter disputes, as I have seen, are essentially 3 or 4 reasons. The biggest one is, of course, control of the board or the management. The second is determining the strategic direction of the company, and especially at a time when the company is at an inflection point. The traditional issue of growth versus profitability. Third is the nature of investments which are required. In one path, the investments required will be very high, in other path, it may be less. So these sort of things are generally not, spelled out in the shareholders agreement in so much detail. So this governance structure bit which comes to the fore is on issues of this nature. So frankly, I have seen joint ventures which have dissipated because of similar disputes. I've also seen joint ventures which have sort of migrated to it and found a solution. So like the earlier speaker was saying, ultimately it's the sanity of the board, of some mediators like the CEO, who balances both interests, etc., to sit down and, figure out the disputes. Essentially, it will be about the inflection point and which path IndiGo is going to take. This is what I think, because there is this huge opportunity which is beckoning. There is no question. Question is how much do you invest and what risk you take. I think that
opportunity,
perhaps
especially
is one
after
of
what's happening
is
with
perhaps the main issue, and that can after it's happening.
Of course,
yes, correct. Correct.
And Mr. Bhatia, all of this also
remember,
happening at a time when the entire sector. Yeah, and all of this also happening at a time when the entire sector is going through such a bad patch. Turbulence, rough weather, whatever you want to call it. Jitendra Bhargav, I'll come to you. You have said the same point that Mr. Roy is trying to raise. It's about the inflection point, the future of IndiGo, and what's really going to happen to it. And that's where you're seeing perhaps the two promoters being in disagreement and fighting for control, one perceiving that it has less control than the other. Having said that, it's happening very soon after Jet Airways. So I'm going to come to you for the final comment. We've discussed about corporate governance. We've discussed about promoter shareholders. I'll come to you, Jitendra Bhargav, for this. What is this going to mean for maybe, the bidding process for Jet, which is underway? The consumers which are panicking, saying, hey, if operations at IndiGo suffer, I'm going to have to pay a lot more than I already am.
One thing is very clear, that India is on a growth trajectory. It will continue to grow. That's one point. IndiGo was meeting that growth requirement by placing ambitious orders for new aircraft capacity induction. We all know about 300 plus aircraft are on order. They have a set plan, etc. The first victim of such a feud between the two promoters would be the slackening of growth. And particularly when they're not seeing eye to eye on whether it's profitability versus growth, or it is expansion of operations to Europe and United States, global operations, etc. The victim would be the Indian aviation. And as I said earlier, we have a very small number of carriers which have the capacity of expansion or absorbing capacity. Jet Airways was one example. When its 119 aircraft were grounded, you saw SpiceJet coming, taking a certain capacity, IndiGo, Vistara and Air India all joining hands and taking. And perhaps 6 months from now, we wouldn't feel the absence of Jet Airways, because the capacity induction that is already slated would absorb the growth that's taking place. And growth has, as it is, slackened because of the high fares. But when IndiGo, which dominates with 47% and has ambitious growth of both domestic and international operations, which carrier is going to absorb that slackening of pace? That's what concerns us. So that is what I suggested earlier, that the best course would be if the two warring sides are brought together on a common platform with some towering figure. And the reason why I said from the aviation industry...
I'm running out of time.
No, one point. The reason why I said from the aviation industry
Mr. Bhargav, I gave you time and you had the longest answer in this discussion. I have to go to Sandeep Parekh because I have to wrap up the show. Sandeep Parekh, Mr. Bhargav has made some very important points. I'm going to end it with you. I'll end it with IndiGo. We've discussed corporate governance. We've discussed promoter spats. He raised one point at the beginning, that we don't have a stalwart to try and sort out this issue. I'll come out with examples for you with KV Kamath with respect to the Ambani brothers, for example, or Sunil Mittal with the Munjal family when that split took place. But if you were to look at the board of IndiGo itself, it has a towering figure. It has a towering figure in the form of the former SEBI chairman, M. Damodran, who's on the board. M. Damodran, who talks regularly on corporate governance, he has very strong views on this. Why can't the chairman of the board sort out the issue? Or do you think it should always be someone outside of the board?
No, I think the first port of call would obviously be the chairman of the board, particularly given his stature. But of course, they're free to tap into. Again, we don't know how deep the rot is and how long the festering has been going on. So if it's something which is cropped up over the last few weeks or last few months, I'm sure it can be sorted out internally. But I think once it becomes much more kind of entrenched, much more, much deeper rot, then I think they may want to get an outsider, because that means things are have kind of gone out of control. But again, with a person like Mr. Damodaran, who incidentally was my boss at SEBI, I don't think they really need to go outside. But again, no matter what kind of agreements you have, what kind of other documents that you have, I don't think any document in the world can prevent a fight between two people with such dominant shareholding. So if a fight has to happen, it will happen. But there are certainly people who can help reduce the impact, or maybe completely eliminate the fight, have some kind of settlement between the two. But I certainly think that for the sake of a listed company, I certainly hope that there will be a resolution between the two, and hopefully Mr. Damodaran will play a critical role in the settlement.
Let's see how that happens. You've got the two promoters, the founders of IndiGo, that together own, just shy of 75% in the airline. Investments 350 crores. They've created a behemoth of sorts at an inflection point. Let's see what happens next. We're completely out of time. So, gentlemen, I'd like to thank you for joining us on this special edition today to discuss the mega ET Now news break, which, if I may say so, has everyone in corporate India talking about the tussle between the promoters of IndiGo and larger public interest. Let's hope they sort it out sooner than later. Many thanks for watching.